Hey everyone, let's talk about A Man Called Ove. It's a Swedish comedy drama about a 59-year-old man who is basically like your quintessential grumpy old man. He lives in a very small neighborhood, in a very small community, where he spends his days unsuccessfully trying to enforce his very strict principles onto others, his very neighbor association rules that mostly have to do with parking and driving. He constantly argues with his neighbors about the way they park their cars or the way they drive their cars, and pets. He has a neighbor who has a very small dog that just pisses all over the place. He constantly threatens her that he's going to take that dog one day and turn it into a boot or something. So the man is very old school. The man is very strict. What can I tell you? He is a widow. His wife recently died. He visits her grave every single day, and this has led to him losing the will to live. He is suicidal. He wants to die so he can be with his wife. And the funny thing is that every single time he attempts to commit suicide, something or someone prevents it from happening. And eventually, a young family moves into the house across the street, and a very unlikely friendship starts developing, especially between him and the woman of the family, who is of Iranian descent. And this will lead to Uwe slowly starting to open up and to talk more about his past, to share memories of his past. I was a little bit hesitant about reviewing this film, honestly, after watching it. I know it is based on an international best-selling novel. The reason I watched it, however, is that now it is one of the nominations at the Oscars for Best Foreign Language Film. And it's not like I haven't enjoyed similar films before about people either regaining their will to live or redeeming themselves, but this just seemed like a little bit too sugar-coated and obvious for my tastes. But of course, I'm going to give credit where credit is due and praise the film for the many things it does incredibly well. Main one of them being Uwe, our main character, both in the way he is played by, especially by Rolf Lassgard, who plays the 59-year-old Uwe, but also for the way he is played by Philip Berg, who plays a young Uwe who is in his 20s and 30s, who we see in flashbacks, and also for the way this character is written. From the get-go, this was a character I simultaneously disliked because, yeah, he is very stubborn and very hard-headed, and he is basically this very obsolete old asshole, but I also felt pity for him. It was very clear that he has lost someone he truly loved from the bottom of his heart, and also by the end I garnered a lot of respect for him, because that can be attributed mostly to the way the film is constructed, because the more and more we find out about him, the more and more we see of what he went through during his life, we get a deeper understanding of him, we get to see just how mistreated he was during certain periods of his life, and I kind of got the sense that, hey, just because someone is kind of an asshole, that doesn't mean if I sit down with him and talk with him that he actually might have a very valid explanation for why he is behaving the way he is behaving. And I really think that's the strong point here. It's that Uwe, while hesitatingly starts opening up more and more, we get to find out details about the life he shared with his lovely wife, and we get to see this all through flashbacks, of course, and that's an aspect of these types of films I'm not usually a big fan of, but here it works, because while the main narrative, the main timeline with the old Uwe is somewhat conventional and predictable, even sometimes to a fault, this secondary narrative, this secondary timeline with the young Uwe, with the couple, adds a lot of intrigue to the story. It's basically like the prequel, explaining how Uwe eventually got to this point in his life where he felt like he didn't have anything to live for. And I think that's really an accomplishment, because we know his wife is eventually going to die at some point. I mean, that's one of the first things we find out in the movie, so there's no surprise there, but there's just so much more to the story than that. I mean, Uwe, both as a child and as an adult and as a husband, really had to go through some major obstacles during his life, really ran into some major speed bumps, which he had to overcome together with his wife. Not to mention they are a pretty unlikely couple, because she just radiates positivity. She is very well read. She is basically a bookworm. She wants to be a teacher, and she just seems like an all-around fun person to be around, while he, on the other hand, is incredibly deadpan. He is kind of awkward and shy and serious and not all that much of a fun person to be around. And I was really concerned about that, because this is a film in which we have one character being played by two different actors. And that doesn't always work. That doesn't always connect. I mean, sometimes it does, sometimes it can work, like in Lion, for example, which was a film I recently reviewed. There it works. It also helps that the younger version of that character is a 5-year-old little boy. He's a child. His personality is not all that developed yet. So there I really bought it that those two actors were playing the same character. character. But sometimes it can really not work, like in this classic example, for fuck's sake. It's probably one of the worst, in which, no, these two characters are not the same person. Despite the fact that George Lucas really wanted us to believe that they are not. They do not connect at all. The old version of Uwe can really feel like a very different character compared to his younger version sometimes. I mean, sure, he is still very serious as an old man. He is very unfriendly. He is basically like the opposite of friendly, but he is not shy necessarily. I mean, he really knows how to choose his words carefully. He really knows like what to say when he wants to argue with someone, when he wants to put someone in his place. But the interesting thing about that is that we do see the seeds of this personality of his being planted already in the past as well, in a flashback. I remember the very first time we see him like stand up for himself, when he like punches a guy because he wanted to steal his watch. And that's really nice, you cheer for him, but the problem with with old Uwe is that this sort of newfound self-confidence, or whatever you want to call it, has really been blown out of proportions. I mean, he has gotten to the point where he really doesn't know how to hold himself back, and he has this mentality like it's him against the everyone else, against the world. And we do see him really struggling with this. There's a very funny sequence in which he has to take his neighbor to the hospital because she has a bleeding nose, and it's actually his fault. It's because of something he did. He hit her in the face with his garage door, by accident, of course. So they go to the hospital with the woman's two daughters, and while he and the little girls are waiting in the waiting room, we actually see him, I think, for the very first time in the film, like trying to be nice, like trying to actually bond. He reads stories for these little girls, all until eventually he fucks it up, of course. A clown shows up who asks for a coin from him so she can do a magic trick. And when the clown doesn't give back the same coin he gave her, they get into like an argument and even like a semi-fight, and all because of some trivial shit about which he couldn't keep his mouth shut. That's another thing too, like the comedy in this film is really nice. It's very Swedish. Like there are many like little subplots and characters peppered throughout. I can't talk about it all in my short review, but one of the most memorable ones for me was when he is talking about why he is not on good terms anymore with his former best friend. And it all has to do with the fact that one of them used to drive a Volvo and the other one of them used to drive a Saab. And apparently these are two Swedish like car manufacturing companies that are major rivals. I didn't know this because I don't know anything about cars. I had to look it up on the internet. But you know, it's very funny. It's something like I don't even think anyone cares about like who the fuck drives a Volvo and a Saab. Probably only Swedish people do. So yeah, this is good. I mean, I would recommend it. It's you know, it's the type of story about a person losing his way, but eventually people come into his life who sort of help him get his life back on track, and he himself helps others get their lives back on track as well. So you know, it's a very mutual thing. I wasn't as emotional about it as a lot of other critics seem to be. I mean, some people said that they laughed a lot during this film, others said that they cried a lot during this film. I mean, I really didn't do either of those all that much. I mostly found there to be much more emotional resonance the second time I watched, not the whole film, but parts of it. You know, I watched parts of the film in preparation for this review, and especially the ending, which is incredibly bittersweet, really like affected me a lot more the second time I watched it, when I knew what was coming. So that might be an interesting experience, like to watch it again.